Why does everyone pretend she doesn't exist? Mara eventually stepped through the entrance of the grand ballroom, and immediately the air changed. Not for everyone, just for her. The crystal chandeliers scattered fractured light across marble floors that looked like frozen rivers, and everywhere she turned, people in silk and velvet moved like they owned the oxygen in the room. She wore a plain black dress. No jewelry. No shine. Nothing that would catch the light or anyone's attention. Her shoes were sensible flats, scuffed at the toes, silent against the polished stone. Around her, stilettos clicked like gunfire, sharp and aggressive, announcing arrivals and departures with authority. She moved differently, measured steps, not rushing, not lingering, just existing in the spaces between conversations, between glances, between the laughter that never included her. The room buzzed with the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. Defense contractors in suits that cost more than most people's cars. Politicians with practiced smiles that never quite reached their eyes. Shadowy figures who pulled strings from behind velvet curtains and offshore accounts. This was the world of people who decided things, who made calls that moved millions, who shook hands over champagne and sealed deals that would never see daylight. And Mara, she was nobody. At least that's what they saw, a disposable guest. Someone who wandered in, maybe as a plus one, maybe by accident. Someone who didn't belong. She reached for a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. The waiter, young, with terrified eyes that darted around like he was being hunted, jerked the tray away at the last second. Her hand hovered in empty air, fingers curled around nothing, while he scurried toward a group of laughing senators who didn't even notice him. He didn't say sorry. He didn't look back. He just moved like her touch would tarnish the silver, like proximity to her might be contagious. Mara lowered her hand. No anger, no embarrassment, just observation. A woman in emerald silk, her neck weighed down by a diamond choker so thick it looked like a dog collar, turned her back as Mara navigated the edge of the room. The woman's oversized clutch swung out, hard, slamming into Mara's hip with enough force to send most people stumbling. But Mara didn't stumble. She absorbed the impact, her body moving like water around stone, adjusting, flowing, continuing. The woman let out a dramatic gasp, loud enough to pull attention from nearby circles of power. She turned, her face twisted in manufactured outrage. "Do watch where you're going," the woman snapped, dusting off her bag like Mara's cheap dress had left some kind of residue on the expensive leather. "Some of us are wearing things that actually cost money." The circle of men around her chuckled. Low, knowing chuckles. They swirled their cognac, eyes sliding over Mara with the kind of boredom reserved for furniture or wallpaper. Disdain without effort. Dismissal without thought. They looked at her and saw nothing. Then they looked away, back to their conversation about offshore accounts and tax shelters and the kind of money that never touched American soil. Nick spotted her first. Sharp features, sharper heels. The kind of woman who measured people by their labels. Designer bags, polished shoes, the right handshake. She was the host's assistant, the gatekeeper, the one who decided who mattered and who didn't. And right now, watching Mara stand near the edge of the crowd, she decided Mara didn't. Nick strode over, heels clicking like accusations on the marble floor, each step a judgment. "Excuse me," Nick said, her voice laced with fake politeness that barely hid the edge underneath. "I don't see your name on the VIP list. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Mara met her gaze, steady, calm, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She didn't fidget, didn't explain, just nodded once. Simple, clear. "Yes, I'm supposed to be here." Nix took a step closer, invading the space between them, her perfume cloying and overly sweet, thick enough to choke on. She reached out, fingers pinching the fabric of Mara's sleeve, rubbing it between thumb and forefinger with the kind of sneer usually reserved for spoiled milk. "Polyester blend," Nick said, letting the fabric snap back against Mara's arm. She wiped her fingers on her own dress immediately after, like she'd touched something dirty. "At a gala hosted by Defense Corp, I suppose, they just let anyone walk in off the street these days. It's practically a security risk just having you stand near the drapery." The host noticed. Caldwell roar. broad-shouldered, built like he still lifted weights from his military days, now running a logistics empire that supplied gear to half the armed forces. He had that entitled air, the kind that came from knowing his checks cleared doors others couldn't even knock on. He sauntered over, glass in hand, not bothering to hide his dismissal. His eyes barely touched Mara before sliding back to Nix. "What's the holdup here?" he asked, not looking at Mara. Nix leaned in, voice dropping but not enough. "She's not on the list, sir. Came as someone's +1, I think. Doesn't look like she belongs." Roar finally turned his eyes on Mara, appraising, like she was a faulty shipment, damaged goods, a mistake in the inventory. "Yeah, well, we can't have strays wandering in," he said, waving a hand dismissively toward a security guard stationed by the pillar. "Keep an eye on this one. If she touches the hors d'oeuvres, toss her. We don't need her scavenging the buffet like a rat." Laughter rippled through the nearby group. A snobby investor with a Rolex that screamed insecurity and his fake nice wife who nodded along like it was gospel. "Honestly," the wife said, loud enough for Mara to hear, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some people think they can just show up and blend in. It's embarrassing." A younger socialite, desperate to climb the ladder, pulled out her phone. She angled it, making sure Mara was clearly visible in the background, standing alone, out of place. She tapped the screen furiously, likely posting it with a caption mocking the help trying to act like guests. Tragic, really. The socialite giggled, showing the screen to her friend. "Look at her posture," the friend said, loud whispers that carried like shouts. "She stands like she's waiting for a bus. Someone should tell her the service entrance is in the alley." Mara's eyes flicked to the phone screen, registered the image, but her expression remained smooth, cold, as still as the marble beneath her feet. Another guest joined in. Harlan, status-obsessed lobbyist, the type with gelled hair and a tie that cost more than most people's rent, always angling for the next connection, always stepping on others to feel tall. "Look at her shoes," Harlan muttered to his companion, a young aide who giggled on cue, probably from a discount rack. "How did she even get past security?" The aide leaned in, voice carrying like she wanted an audience. "And no makeup. Girl, this is a party, not a funeral. You trying to scare people off." Harlan stepped directly into Mara's path, forcing her to stop or collide with him. He didn't move, just swirled his drink, forcing her to step sideways into a potted fern. He looked at the air as if the plant had more right to the space than she did. "Excuse me," he said, not to her but to the room. "Can we get some air freshener over here? The smell of desperation is getting pungent." A waiter passed by, offering trays of appetizers. But when he reached her, he hesitated, glancing at the group as if unsure. Mara waved it off gently. "No thanks," she said quietly. But Harlan wasn't letting up. He gestured to his empty glass, thrusting it toward Mara's chest. "Since you're standing there doing nothing, be useful and run this to the bar. Top shelf. Don't water it down like you probably do at home." Mara looked at the glass, then at Harlan's face. Her hands remained at her sides. She didn't take it. The rejection made Harlan's face flush deep, angry red. He dropped the glass on the floor at her feet. The crystal shattered. Amber liquid splashed onto the hem of her dress, dark stains spreading across the cheap fabric. "Oops," he smirked, looking around for validation. "Looks like we have a spill. Clean up on aisle trash." The room felt colder, the mockery building like a wave, each comment landing harder, more personal, but Mara just closed her bag with a soft click. Her eyes scanned the faces. No anger, just observation. She was watching, learning, remembering, because somewhere, buried beneath the humiliation, beneath the cruel laughter and the shattered glass, a question lingered. Why was she really here, and more importantly, what did they not know about her? The answer would come soon enough, but not yet. What happens when the lights go out, and fear walks in wearing the wrong uniform? The ballroom hummed with the low buzz of deals being made and reputations being polished. Mara stood near the edge, invisible to the crowd that had spent the last hour making sure she knew she didn't belong. The crystal chandeliers above flickered once, then twice. Then the room plunged into darkness. not complete darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting the ballroom in a dim, sickly yellow glow that made everyone's faces look gaunt and hollow. The conversation stopped. The laughter died. For a moment, the only sound was the rustle of expensive fabric and the nervous shifting of feet on marble. Then the doors burst open. 3 men stormed in. Tactical gear. Black, heavy. The kind that looked official, looked real, looked like it meant business. They moved fast, boots pounding against the floor, rifles raised, voices shouting commands that cut through the stunned silence like knives. FBI, nobody move. Hands where we can see them. The crowd froze. Gasps echoed through the room. A woman in pearls clutched her chest, hyperventilating. A senator dropped his glass, champagne pooling at his feet like spilled secrets. The men moved with purpose, scanning the room, weapons trained on the terrified guests who raised their hands instinctively, eyes wide with shock and confusion. Then one of them pointed. At Mara. You on the ground now. The command hit like a physical blow. Every eye in the room turned to her. The nobody, the woman in the cheap dress, the one they'd mocked and dismissed and humiliated. And now, somehow, she was the target. The men advanced, weapons trained on her, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony of authority. Hands behind your head. Get down. Don't make us repeat ourselves. Myra didn't move. Not yet. Her eyes tracked them. 3 men. The one in front, tall, muscular, face obscured by a balaclava, led the charge. Behind him, 2 more. One stocky, built like a linebacker. The other lean, nervous energy radiating off him like heat. They moved like soldiers, talked like soldiers, looked like soldiers, but something was wrong. Mara's eyes narrowed, focusing on the insignia on their uniforms. Navy SEAL tridents, gold, gleaming under the emergency lights, proud symbols of elite warriors, except the stitching, the placement, it was off just slightly. The wings too wide, the anchor positioned wrong, small details, details most people would never notice. But Mara noticed, because she'd spent years hunting people who wore uniforms they hadn't earned. The lead man grabbed her arm, rough, yanking her forward. Mara Vinsley, you're under arrest for treason, espionage, and conspiracy against the United States government. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Treason, espionage, conspiracy. The crowd gasped again, louder this time, the shock morphing into something darker. Judgment, suspicion, fear. They looked at her differently now, not as a nobody, but as a threat, a traitor. Caldwell Rohr stepped forward, his face a mask of confusion and outrage. What the hell is going on here? The lead man didn't look at him. Sir, step back. This is a federal matter. We have intel that this woman has been selling classified defense contracts to foreign entities. She's a security risk. The words hit the crowd like a bomb. Selling classified information. Foreign entities. A spy in their midst. The defense contractors shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to each other, calculating, assessing, distancing themselves from the woman they'd spent the evening degrading. The politicians looked pale, worried about associations, about being in the same room as someone accused of treason. Harlan, still nursing his bruised ego from earlier, smirked. I knew something was off about her, he muttered to his aide. You can always tell. Nick stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, her mind racing through every interaction, every word, wondering if she'd just spent the evening insulting a federal criminal. The young socialite who'd taken photos earlier frantically pulled out her phone again, this time filming, capturing every second of the unfolding drama, her hands shaking with excitement and fear. The lead man forced Mara to her knees, his hand pressing down on her shoulder, the barrel of his rifle inches from her head. She didn't resist, didn't fight, just knelt there, quiet still, her eyes tracking every movement, every breath, every flaw. You have the right to remain silent, he began, his voice loud, performative, playing to the crowd. Anything you say can and will be used against you. But Mara wasn't listening to the words, she was listening to the cadence. The tone, the slight hesitation between phrases. Real FBI agents didn't hesitate. Real Navy SEALs didn't pause. They moved with precision, with confidence, with muscle memory that came from years of training and operations. These men, they were performing, reciting lines, playing roles. And then she saw it. The stocky one, the linebacker, shifted his weight and his rifle dipped slightly. Finger off the trigger, safety still on. A professional would never let their weapon drop, would never relax their grip in an active arrest. But this man did, because he wasn't a professional. He was a contractor, a hired gun, a performer in a costume. The lean one, the nervous one, kept glancing at Roar. Quick, furtive glances, checking in, seeking approval. Real federal agents didn't check in with civilians during an arrest. They followed protocol, chain of command. But this man looked at Roar like he was waiting for direction, because Roar was the one giving orders. Mara's mind raced, piecing it together, the lights going out, the dramatic entrance, the accusations of treason, the perfect timing. This wasn't a real arrest. It was a setup, a performance designed to remove her from the building, to discredit her, to silence her before she could do whatever she came here to do. But they'd made a mistake. They'd underestimated her. Again. The lead man finished reading the Miranda rights, his voice dripping with false authority. He grabbed Mara's wrist, pulling it behind her back, reaching for zip-tie cuffs. His grip was strong, confident, arrogant, and that's when Mara moved. Not yet with violence, not yet with force, but with something quieter, more dangerous. She turned her head just slightly and looked directly at the lead man's insignia. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, steady, almost conversational. "Your trident is sewn wrong." The words were quiet, simple, but they cut through the room like a blade. The lead man froze, his hand still gripping her wrist, his eyes locked on hers. And for the first time since they'd entered, she saw it. Uncertainty, fear. "What?" he growled, trying to sound authoritative, but the edge in his voice betrayed him. Mara's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "The anchor on a Navy SEAL trident faces up. Yours faces down. The wings are positioned wrong. The stitching is commercial grade, not military issue. You bought that patch online, didn't you?" The room went silent. The guests, who had been watching with morbid fascination, now leaned in, eyes darting between Mara and the men in tactical gear. The lead man's jaw clenched, his grip on her wrist tightened. But he didn't respond, couldn't respond, because she was right, and everyone in the room was starting to realize it. How do you fight men who forgot they're not actually soldiers? The lead man's hand hovered near his sidearm. Not drawing, not yet, but the threat was there, hanging in the air like smoke. The crowd pressed back, forming a wide circle, terrified spectators at a gladiator match they didn't sign up for. Mara remained on her knees, but everything about her posture had changed. She wasn't broken, wasn't defeated. She was coiled, waiting, a predator watching prey that didn't realize the hunt had reversed. "Shut up," the lead man hissed, his voice low, dangerous. He stepped closer, trying to regain control of the situation, trying to salvage the performance. "You're under arrest. You don't get to talk." Mara tilted her head, her eyes never leaving his. "You're Elias Brennan, former Marine, dishonorably discharged for conduct unbecoming. You run a private security firm out of Virginia. Low-tier work, bodyguard gigs, event security, nothing prestigious. Nothing that pays well enough to afford real tactical gear." Elias' face went pale beneath the balaclava. His hand twitched toward his weapon. Mara kept talking, her voice calm, clinical, dissecting him like a surgeon with a scalpel. "The big one behind you is Cale Morrison. Army washout, failed Ranger selection twice. Now he does repo work and weekend warrior cosplay at gun shows. And the twitchy one, that's your cousin, isn't it? Fresh out of a community college criminal justice program, never served, never qualified. Just desperate for a paycheck." The nervous one, the cousin, took a visible step back, his rifle trembling in his hands. Cale, the stocky linebacker, growled, his face flushing red with rage. But Elias held up a hand, stopping him. Last chance, Elias said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. Get on the ground, face down, hands behind your head, or I will make you. Myra didn't move. No, you won't. And then she stood. Not fast, not aggressive, just stood, rising from her knees with the kind of calm that made the entire room hold its breath. Elias' hand went to his sidearm, fingers wrapping around the grip. But he didn't draw, because somewhere deep in his gut, beneath the bravado and the costume and the paycheck, a primal instinct screamed at him. This woman is dangerous. You were paid to drag me out of here, Mara said, brushing imaginary dust off her cheap dress. Make a scene, discredit me. Maybe rough me up a little in the parking lot. Dump me somewhere quiet, but you made a mistake. You came in here thinking I was nobody, that I couldn't fight back, that I wouldn't. She took a step forward. Elias took a step back. The power dynamic shifted so fast the crowd gasped. Mara's voice dropped, softer now, almost conversational. You're not the first men to underestimate me. You won't be the last. But tonight you're going to learn something. Elias snapped. His hand went to his sidearm, yanking it from the holster, raising it toward Mara's chest. The crowd screamed. Cale moved forward, reaching for her. The nervous cousin fumbled with his rifle, trying to chamber a round with shaking hands, and Mara moved. Not like someone who'd been trained to fight, like someone who'd been trained to hunt. She stepped inside Elias' firing line, her hand snapping out, catching his wrist mid-draw. She twisted. Hard. The sidearm clattered to the floor, spinning across the marble. Elias' face contorted in pain as she folded his arm back, using his own momentum against him, driving him forward into a stumble. Cale charged, roaring, his massive hands reaching for her throat. Mara didn't retreat. She waited until he was committed, until his weight was forward, until he couldn't stop. Then she pivoted, low, fast. Her elbow drove into his ribs with surgical precision, targeting the floating rib, the vulnerable spot most people don't even know exists. The air left Cale's lungs in a shocked gasp. His hands dropped. Mara's foot swept his leg out from under him, and all 300 pounds of muscle and bravado hit the marble floor with a bone-jarring thud that echoed through the ballroom. The nervous cousin fired, not at Mara. He didn't have time to aim. The rifle went off in panic, the round punching through the ceiling, bringing down a shower of plaster dust and terrified screams from the crowd. Mara moved toward him like water, smooth and inevitable. She grabbed the barrel of the rifle, yanking it down and to the side, twisting it out of his grip with a sharp, practiced motion. He held on for half a second. Then his survival instincts kicked in, and he let go, stumbling backward, hands raised in surrender. Mara ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, tossed the rifle onto a nearby sofa like it was a child's toy. The cousin stared at his empty hands, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what had just happened. Elias recovered first. He pulled a knife from his belt, not a military blade, a serrated hunting knife, the kind you buy at a sporting goods store, the kind that screams amateur hour. He brandished it, breathing hard, face twisted with rage and humiliation. "I'm going to gut you," he screamed, abandoning all pretense of military bearing, all pretense of professionalism. Mara didn't respond, just waited, patient, calm, watching him come. He lunged, wild, desperate, the knife slashing toward her midsection. Mara stepped past him, catching his wrist mid-thrust, using his forward momentum to hurl him into the marble pillar where the security guard had been standing earlier. Elias' face met the pillar with a sickening crunch. He slid to the floor, the knife clattering away harmlessly, blood streaming from his nose and mouth. Cale, groaning, tried to push himself up. Mara placed a foot on his chest, pressing him back down. She wasn't breathing hard, wasn't even sweating. Just standing there, calm, controlled, looking down at the men who'd thought they could intimidate her. "You're not Navy SEALs," she said, her voice projecting to the back of the room, calm and terrifyingly steady amidst the chaos. "You're private contractors, cheap ones, hired to make a scene and extract a target." She looked at Roar, who was now backing away toward the emergency exit, his face the color of ash. Isn't that right, Mr. Roar? You didn't want the audit to happen, so you staged a treason arrest to get me off the property before I could serve the papers." The crowd gasped, the collective intake of breath sucking the air out of the room. The narrative had flipped so violently that the guests were reeling. The nobody was an auditor, a federal agent. The ambiguity made it worse, made it terrifying. Elias, clutching his bleeding mouth, looked up at Mara with eyes full of pain and defeat. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to threaten. The menace in her stillness was enough. "Who hired you?" she asked quietly. Elias spat out a mouthful of blood. His hand trembled as he pointed at Roar. "Him. Roar. He said you were a corporate spy. He paid us 50 grand to dump you in the river." The accusation hung in the air. Heavy. Undeniable. The socialite who'd been filming earlier was still recording, her mouth agape, capturing every pixel of Roar's ruin. The defense contractors and politicians, realizing they were witnessing a felony conspiracy unravel in real time, began to inch away from Roar, creating a wide, isolating circle around him. What does power look like when it doesn't need to announce itself? Roar stammered, backing up until he hit the banquet table, knocking over a tower of champagne glasses that shattered around him like his future. The cascade of crystal and liquid echoed through the silent ballroom, every eye fixed on the man who'd spent the evening playing king. His hands came up, defensive, pleading, the mask of authority crumbling into something desperate and pathetic. "They're lying," he gasped, his voice cracking. She's deranged. Someone call the real police." Mara stopped inches from him, close enough that he could see every detail of her face. The calm, the control, the absolute absence of fear. "I already did," she said quietly. Then she reached into the hidden pocket of her dress, the one Nix had claimed was cheap polyester, and pulled out something that caught the light of the chandelier. A badge, not a corporate ID, not a consultant's credential, a federal shield, heavy, gold, real. "Special Inspector General," Mara said, her voice carrying through the stunned silence. "I've been investigating Defense Corp for 6 months, selling faulty body armor to active duty troops, the same troops these clowns were pretending to be." The words hit the crowd like a physical blow. The investors went pale. The politicians started calculating exit strategies. The socialites who'd mocked her earlier looked like they wanted the marble floor to swallow them whole. Harlan, still cradling his broken arm, sobbed quietly in the corner, his world collapsing around him. Mara turned back to the center of the room. Her eyes found the security guard who dumped her bag earlier, the one who'd sneered at her lip balm and generic key card. He stood frozen by the pillar, his face drained of color. "Pick it up," she said to him. The guard, a man twice her size who treated her like trash minutes ago, scrambled to his knees. His hands trembled as he gathered her items. The lip balm, the folded paper, the key card, which wasn't generic at all but an encrypted federal access key. He held them out to her like holy relics, head bowed, unable to meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he whispered. "I didn't know." "You didn't look," Mara corrected him, taking her things. Her voice wasn't cruel, just honest, cutting. "You saw a cheap dress and assumed I was trash. You saw a uniform on these thugs and assumed they were heroes." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You people claim to run the world, but you can't even see what's right in front of you." She scanned the room, meeting eyes, holding gazes, the snobby investor who'd laughed at her shoes, the aide who'd mocked her lack of makeup, the socialite who'd posted photos, the woman in emerald silk who'd struck her with her bag. Every single person who treated her like she was invisible, like she was nothing, now couldn't look away. But they couldn't look at her either. Shame is a heavy thing, heavier than champagne, heavier than diamond chokers, heavier than all the expensive fabric and polished facades in the room combined. Nix tried to sneak away, edging toward the service door, her heels in her hands, moving on silent feet. Mara didn't even look at her. "Sit down, Nix," she commanded. "You signed the invoices. You're an accomplice." Nix froze. A sob escaped her throat. She collapsed into a nearby chair, burying her face in her hands as her social standing evaporated instantly. Everything she'd built, every connection she'd cultivated, every ladder she'd climbed, gone, because she'd measured people by the wrong things, because she'd mistaken appearance for worth, because she'd signed papers without reading them, trusting a man who paid well and lied better. The heavy-set woman who'd hit Mara with her bag earlier frantically tried to delete photos from her phone. Her hands shook so badly she dropped the device. It clattered to the floor, screen cracked, useless. Mara walked past her, picked up a clean napkin from the nearest table and wiped a spot of blood from her arm. Elia's blood. She tossed the napkin onto the table next to the woman. "That's silk," Mara said dryly. "Try not to stain it." The woman flinched like she'd been struck. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The sound broke the spell of silence in the ballroom, reality rushing back in. The fantasy of power and control shattered like the champagne glasses still scattered across the floor. Roar made one last desperate attempt. "You can't do this," he whispered, sweating profusely, his voice barely audible. "Do you know who I am?" Mara stopped, turned, looked at him with the kind of clarity that cuts through lies and excuses and carefully constructed empires. "I know exactly who you are. You're the man who saved a few dollars on Kevlar stitching, the man who cut corners on body armor, the man whose greed cost 12 Marines their lives in Fallujah." She stepped closer, not threatening, just present, undeniable. "And tonight, you're the man going to prison for it." The words hung in the air. Final, absolute. Roar's legs gave out. He slumped against the banquet table, all the fight drained from him, his empire crumbling to dust. The doors burst open again, but this time it wasn't actors in costumes. It was a full FBI tactical entry team, moving with the fluid, silent professionalism that Elias and his goons had failed to mimic. They swept the room, securing Roar and the mercenaries within seconds. Efficient, practiced, real. The lead agent, a tall woman with a serious face, holstered her weapon and walked straight to Mara. She offered a sharp salute. "Director Vensley, we have the perimeter secured. Transport is waiting." "Director," Harlan wheezed from the floor, his face pale with pain and shock. The title hung in the air. She wasn't just an agent. She was command staff. The realization that they'd tried to bully a high-ranking federal director made the room spin for the guests. They'd insulted a woman who could likely revoke their security clearances with a phone call, who could end careers with a signature, who held more power in her cheap black dress than all of them combined in their silk and velvet. Mara looked down at Harlan one last time. "The public restroom is down the hall," she said, echoing his earlier insult. "You might want to clean yourself up. You smell like desperation." She turned her back on him, dismissing him as completely as he tried to dismiss her. As she walked toward the exit, the sea of elites parted for her, terrified, respectful, scrambling to get out of her path. No one dared whisper. No one dared take a picture. The socialite's phone stayed in her purse. The investor's smirk was gone. The politicians looked at the floor. Power doesn't always announce itself with expensive suits and loud voices. Sometimes it walks quietly, wears cheap dresses, waits patiently, and reveals itself only when necessary. Mara reached the door and paused. Her eyes scanned the room one more time, looking for someone. She found him, the young waiter who tried to give her water earlier. He was standing by a pillar, clutching his tray, eyes wide with awe and confusion and something that looked like hope. Mara stopped in front of him. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice softening for the first time that night. "Leo, ma'am," he stammered. Mara reached into her clutch, pulled out a business card, thick cream stock with a gold federal seal, and placed it on his tray. "Leo, if you ever get tired of serving people who treat you like furniture, call this number. We need people who pay attention." She walked out into the cool night air, the chaos of the ballroom fading behind her. The flashing lights of police cruisers painted the hotel walls in frantic bursts of red and blue. Inside, the party was over. The champagne was warm. The reputations were ruined. But outside, Mara took a deep breath. adjusted her cheap black dress, and walked toward the waiting black SUV. Because justice doesn't always wear expensive shoes. Sometimes it just shows up and does the work. Why do we judge so quickly, and what does it cost us when we're wrong? The ballroom's emergency lights still cast their sickly yellow glow over the wreckage. Broken glass, overturned tables, abandoned champagne flutes with lipstick stains on the rims. The guests stood in clusters, whispering frantically, their phones out, already crafting narratives that would protect them, distance them, rewrite their roles in the evening's events. But the truth was already recorded. The socialites' live stream, the security cameras, the federal agents taking statements. The truth doesn't care about rewriting. FBI agents moved through the room with practiced efficiency, separating witnesses, securing evidence, reading rights to people who'd never imagined they'd hear those words directed at them. Rohr sat in a chair, handcuffed, staring at the floor, his empire reduced to rubble in less than an hour. Nix sobbed quietly in the corner, mascara running down her face, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. The mercenaries were being loaded into separate vehicles, their fake uniforms stripped away, revealing the truth beneath the costume. Harlan was taken to an ambulance, his broken arm splinted, his ego shattered beyond repair. The aide who'd giggled at Mara's expense stood alone, abandoned by the people she'd tried so hard to impress, realizing too late that climbing ladders built on cruelty only leads to longer falls. But the guests were learning something else entirely. The heavyset woman in emerald silk sat on a marble bench, her diamond choker feeling heavier now, tighter, like it was choking her. She kept replaying the moment she'd struck Mara with her bag, the deliberate swing, the cruel comment, and Mara's calm, the way she'd absorbed the impact without stumbling, without reacting, like someone who'd been hit before, like someone who knew how to take a blow and keep moving. The woman felt sick. Across the room, the snobby investor who'd laughed at Mara's shoes was being interviewed by an FBI agent. Routine questions. Did he know Rohr? Did he have business dealings with Defense Corp? Did he know anything about the faulty armor contracts? He answered mechanically, his mind elsewhere, stuck on the moment he dismissed Mara as trash. The cheap dress. The scuffed shoes. The invisible woman who turned out to hold more power than everyone in the room combined. The agent finished the interview and handed him a card. If you remember anything else, call this number. The investor looked at the card, then looked at the door where Mara had walked out. He'd never even learned her name, had never bothered to ask, because to him she hadn't mattered, hadn't been worth knowing. Now he'd never forget her. The young socialite who'd posted photos sat in a corner, her phone in her lap, watching the video playback of the fight. Watching Mara move, fast, precise, deadly, not like someone who got lucky, like someone who'd trained for years, who'd lived through situations most people only saw in movies. The socialite's followers were already commenting on the video, but not with mockery, with shock, with questions. Who is she? That's a federal director. You literally mocked her and she could end your family's career law. The comments kept coming. The socialite deleted the post, then deleted it from her cloud, then realized it didn't matter. Screenshots lived forever. The internet never forgot, and neither would she. Leo, the young waiter, stood by the pillar, holding the business card Mara had given him. He turned it over in his hands, reading the embossed text. Office of the Inspector General, Director M. Vensley, a phone number, an email address, an invitation to a life he'd never imagined. He'd served at dozens of these events, had been invisible to hundreds of people like the ones in this room, had been treated like furniture, like background noise, like something that existed only to make their lives easier. And through it all, he'd watched, paid attention, noticed things. That's what Mara had said. We need people who pay attention. He pocketed the card. Around him, the reality of the evening settled over the guests like a fog. They'd spent hours judging a woman based on her appearance, her dress, her shoes, her lack of jewelry. They'd made assumptions, drawn conclusions, treated her like she was beneath them, and they'd been catastrophically wrong. An older senator, one of the quieter guests who'd watched the evening unfold without participating in the cruelty, approached the FBI agent in charge. "That woman," he said carefully. "Director Vinsley. How long has she been investigating Defense Corp?" The agent looked at him with the kind of expression that said she knew exactly what he was asking. 6 months, sir. Embedded operation. Deep cover. She attended 12 events like this one, collected evidence, built the case. Tonight was the culmination. The senator absorbed this. So she endured all of that, the mockery, the insults, for 6 months. The agent's expression softened slightly. Director Vinsley volunteered for the assignment. She said the best way to understand how these networks operate is to see how they treat people they think don't matter. She was right. The senator looked around the room, at the people who'd laughed, who'd sneered, who'd treated Mara like she was invisible. "They revealed themselves," he said quietly. "Yes, sir," the agent replied. "They did." The senator walked away, his mind turning over the implications. Every guest in this room had shown their true character tonight, not in moments of crisis or danger, but in how they treated someone they thought was powerless, someone they thought couldn't fight back, someone they thought didn't matter. And now it was all on record. Every insult, every cruel laugh, every dismissive gesture, captured by security cameras, witnessed by federal agents, documented in official reports. The kind of documentation that follows you, that appears in background checks, that gets whispered about in boardrooms and confirmed in closed-door meetings. Reputations aren't built in grand gestures. They're built in small moments, in how you treat the waiter, the person who can't help your career, the one standing alone at the edge of the room. And tonight, in this ballroom, dozens of powerful people had revealed exactly who they were when they thought no one important was watching. Except someone important was watching. She was just wearing a cheap dress. When does silence become the loudest statement of all? The black SUV pulled away from the hotel, red and blue lights fading in the rearview mirror. Mara sat in the back seat, still wearing the cheap black dress, now stained with champagne and blood. The FBI agent driving glanced at her in the mirror. "That was intense, Director. You good?" Mara nodded, looking out the window at the city passing by. Lights, buildings, people living their lives, unaware of the small war that had just ended in a ballroom downtown. "I'm fine, Martinez, just tired." "You've been undercover for 6 months," Martinez said, her voice careful. "Attending these events, being treated like—" She trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. "Like trash," Mara offered, a faint smile touching her lips. "It's fine, you can say it, that was the point." Martinez pulled the SUV through a security checkpoint, entering the underground garage of a federal building. "Still, that took discipline. I don't know if I could have done it." Mara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "People reveal themselves when they think there are no consequences. When they believe the person in front of them doesn't matter. That's when you see the truth." The SUV parked. They sat in the silence of the concrete garage, engine ticking as it cooled. Martinez turned in her seat. "The evidence you gathered, it's solid. 12 events, dozens of witnesses, recorded conversations, financial documents, shipping manifests. Everything we need to prove Roar knowingly supplied substandard armor to military units." Mara unbuckled her seatbelt. 12 Marines died because he saved $8 per unit on stitching. $8, and he bought himself a yacht with the difference. Martinez's jaw tightened. "The families. They'll get justice and answers. That's more than they had this morning." They exited the vehicle. The building was quiet, most staff gone for the night. Their footsteps echoed in the empty corridors. Martinez walked Mara to a debriefing room, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Director, what you did tonight, that business card you gave the waiter, that was good." Mara looked at her. "Leo." "Yeah, a kid like that working those events, invisible to everyone. He sees things, hears things. He'd make a good agent." That's what I thought, Mara said. People who have been overlooked learn to pay attention. They notice the details everyone else misses. Martinez smiled, like fake seal tridents. Exactly like fake seal tridents. Inside the debriefing room, Mara sat at a metal table and began writing her report. The events of the evening still fresh, still raw. She detailed every interaction, every insult, every moment of cruelty, not because it hurt her feelings, but because it painted a picture of the culture that allowed corruption to thrive. When people can't see the humanity in a person wearing a cheap dress, they can't see the humanity in soldiers wearing body armor that won't stop bullets. It all connects. It all matters. Hours later, when the report was finished and submitted, Mara changed into casual clothes, jeans, a comfortable sweater, sneakers that had seen better days. She walked out of the federal building into the cool night air, breathing deeply, letting the tension of 6 months bleed away slowly. Her phone buzzed, a text from her sister. Saw something on the news about Defense Corp arrests. That you? Mara smiled, typing back. Can't say, classified, but I'm done with the assignment, coming home soon. Good, I'll make dinner, real food, not those awful galas. Thank God, Mara typed. I never want to see another champagne flute again. She walked to her car, a practical sedan with a dent in the rear bumper and a faded bumper sticker that said Semper Fi. As she drove through the empty streets, she thought about the faces in that ballroom. The shock, the shame, the realization. Some of them would learn from tonight, would question their assumptions, would treat the next invisible person with more dignity. Others wouldn't, would rationalize, would find ways to justify their behavior, would convince themselves they were the victims somehow. But it didn't matter what they learned. The case was built. The evidence was documented. Justice would move forward regardless of whether anyone felt sorry. Mara thought about the 12 Marines, young men and women who'd trusted their equipment, who'd followed orders, who'd done everything right and died anyway because someone wanted a bigger profit margin. She thought about their families, the parents who'd lost children, the spouses who'd lost partners, the children who'd lost fathers and mothers. That's who tonight was for, not for Mara's dignity, not for revenge against people who were rude at a party, but for the people who couldn't fight back, who couldn't demand answers, who couldn't walk into a ballroom and expose the truth. That's what the badge meant. That's what the job required. She pulled into her apartment building, parked in her usual spot, sat in the car for a moment, letting the engine tick. 6 months of being invisible, 6 months of absorbing insults, 6 months of watching people reveal their true nature when they thought there were no consequences. And in the end, there were consequences. Not immediate, not dramatic, but real, legal, permanent. The kind that follow you for years, that show up in background checks and whispered conversations and closed doors that used to be open. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Mara grabbed her bag from the passenger seat, locked the car, walked to her apartment. Tomorrow she'd start the paperwork, the prosecution process, the coordination with military families, the long, slow grind of the justice system. But tonight she'd sleep, in her own bed, in comfortable clothes, without having to pretend to be nobody. Because she'd never been nobody. She'd always been exactly who she needed to be, a federal director doing her job, a woman who understood that real power doesn't announce itself with expensive clothes and loud voices. It just shows up, does the work, and lets the truth speak for itself. And sometimes that's the loudest statement of all.